In working with Tim, I had the opportunity to not just work with him, but also other artists, people that I hadn't known, got a chance to know and collaborate with. And one of the songs that the world ended up knowing really well was "Wake Me Up," and it all started when I had a chance to meet Mike Einziger. Mike, how you doing?
I'm great, man. It's really good to see your face, really good to hear your voice, and
Likewise.
happy to be in your presence.
Oh, I'm happy to be in your presence as well, especially to pay tribute to Tim, who, dramatically, I think changed my career. I would say, had a huge impact on you personally as well, having worked with him in the studio so much.
Absolutely. He, he was so young and like a couple almost like a couple generations removed from me, and it was such a treat and such a different thing to be in a room. I learned so much from him
Right.
and from his process, and I mean, we all did, right? Like it was just an interesting, totally different way of looking at music that I had never personally been around or experienced, and I feel very, very lucky to have been around that, and even more lucky to have been part of some of his most impactful music.
I get it. I hear you. I think, your history, your experience as a musician in a band, um, you know, and for at least like you said at least two generations, two musical generations, but like an entire rock band's life cycle ahead of even meeting Tim. Um, what were you used to in terms of creating music? What was the standard for you?
I mean, really, up until I, s- I started working with Tim, I'd primarily been in a room with a bunch of people playing instruments, um, which sounds like what you would experience writing
Right.
songs. But he was part of like a younger, newer generation, and now we're like, we're coming up. It's going to be 10 years removed, like soon, but his instrument was his laptop,
Mm,
and that was like a totally new way of looking at music for me at that time. I mean, I was like aware of electronic music, um, but really someone who could sort of be any instrument, and any, whether it was a percussive instrument or a, a even
melodic.
yeah, anything, literally anything. And he could be an orchestra, he could be, a synthesizer, he could be anything. And that was just completely, like, it freaked me out. And also his ability, how fast he worked. Like he would put something together in 5 seconds that sounded like it came out of a studio with all the most expensive equipment that we had to make music. Like doing that was so hard prior to that, and he did it so easily. You know what I mean? It's kind of like,
Yeah, he was really quick with it. What was the connection? How did you get to end up meeting Tim?
um, he sought me out actually, through Neil Jacobson, at Interscope, and he, I guess wanted to, he'd heard through his management, and management that I was working with at the time, Martin Kierzenbaum, that I was like kind of starting to branch out and write songs with people. It was something I really hadn't done a lot of. Being in a band, it was always sort of, I worked with my band, like that was it.
Yeah.
I mean, I did other projects and worked with other people, but like as far as just like songwriting went, like I never really did much of that. So it was a new thing for me at the time.
So
What were you gonna ask?
Marty was had a label at Interscope, but you weren't on your band wasn't on Interscope, right? Incubus
No.
is was
I-
releasing music through who?
At the time, we may have either been on Sony. We were on Sony. We were on Epic Records for about 17 years, a very long time. And then I think right around that time, we had sort of come to the end of our relationship with Sony, and we were in the process of We ended up signing with Island, but that I think happened a little bit after. So I think
So
we were kind of in
limbo.
a in between period
Yeah.
at the time.
And Marty would have known uh, Neil because they're in the same building, literally in the same building
Yeah,
every day, pretty much.
yeah. So Martin has a record label called Cherry Tree, and at the time it was being distributed through Interscope Records, and so they were always working in super close proximity. Neil Jacobson and Martin, and the idea was just let's get us together, um, and see if there is any chemistry or whatever. And I I felt very the first time I met Tim. I remember he showed up. It was like 4 hours late,
Where
and
did he show up? What was the session?
it was at so it was in my studio at Hans Zimmer's studio, remote control. Um, we my wife and I, Anne Marie, we have a little room there, and so he came there to meet me for the first time, and he was super late, and he was like really apologetic, and it was just a funny experience, and but he was very sort of particular about what he wanted. That was something that was noteworthy to me at the time. It was like he seemed like really like I want to make music that's electronic, but that has a soul and that incorporates elements of folk music. Like he really seemed to love that, and he loved certain sort of chord changes. There were a certain type of chord changes that he just like, and he didn't know what to call it, and he would like play songs and be like that right there, and I'd be like, oh, that's like a secondary dominant or something. It's to be like this certain type of chord change, and he just loved it, and it was great to see his enthusiasm, and you know he was so talented. He was just dripping talent.
That's dope. So that first encounter, did you guys create anything in that first session, or just kind of play around?
We just talked. We didn't write anything. We just sort of hung out like friends would hang out and talk about music, um because I think that's important, if you're going to make music. I mean, at least the way that I make music, it's like it's not something that I do in a formulaic way. It has to sort of just be natural,
Yeah.
and he was a good hang. We had a great time. I had no idea if I'd have anything in common with him at all. Um, but we did, and we made a plan. And our plan was that he was going to come over to my house and we were going to write a song. And that's the day we met you.
All right.
That's the day I met you. It's the day I met you. I know he knew you prior, and you guys had been working,
Yeah.
but that day that you came over was the first time I ever wrote a song with Tim, and it was the first time we ever wrote a song together. So what an interesting, special course of events that was.
It really was. And I remember just getting straight to work as soon as I walked in, and you playing the guitar chords for me. And you guys had been working on it before I arrived, and um, me asking you, what do you think about these lyrics? And then it worked out. So then we recorded that night.
It all happened fast, man, and it's like I've said this many times. It's like anytime I've ever been involved with a song that really connected with an audience, whether it was with the band or working with somebody else or whatever, like the best music, and best is such a subjective sort of thing, but like um we achieved this sort of state of flow. Like it all just it didn't seem like it was. I mean, obviously we worked to get it to
Sure.
be great, but it was it, it felt like it almost fell out of us, like it was like you walked in and had these beautiful lyrics, and it was like, of course that's going to go there, and of course that's going to sound good, like cuz your voice. I remember thinking like this is going to be really interesting because you know like sort of folk sounding electronic music has been done like a gazillion times now, but then it hadn't.
Brand new.
Then it was brand new, and it was weird, and it was different. It was really different. So I remember thinking like, I knew your voice, and I had heard your music before, and all I could think to myself was like, this is going to be really special. Like this is a very interesting
It was
synthesis.
right, I had no idea what to make of it. I felt like because I was already in this world of, kind of writing songs to one instrument, and I had fallen in love already with James Taylor, Joni Mitchell, Cat Stevens, Janice Ian, um, you know, Carole King. What we ended up doing that night was like, "Oh, okay, this feels really good. This feels like an awesome coffee house, you know, uh, singer-songwriter moment." And it'll be really, really interesting to see what happens on the dance production side. But at least I know that together we were able to accomplish something that was really good. It's something that that it sounds good. We can listen to it as a song.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, for you, do you remember it being 2 days, 2 hours, the next day, 2 weeks? How quickly did Tim come up with the track?
It was that night. It was like, well, I mean, we had been so before you came over, before
Hmm.
you came over, like we were kind of like, he would kind of drop the beat in there at certain
Ah,
points.
okay.
Like he'd been working on, he was kind of building it, as we were moving along. And then when you came, like we dove straight into like not
Vocal.
focusing on on the production of the track. It was like, hey, Aloe is here and we are gonna really like dig into this and make this incredible. And so, but some of those elements had already sort of been like, at least just sort of conceived of in terms of like, this pulsing beat that was behind it. So like, like I had some idea of what it was going to sound
Oh,
like.
that's great. I had no idea because I didn't hear any of that when I was in the room.
So
Amazing.
so he emailed. I'm assuming you were copied on it or whatever. I thought he emailed it to both of us.
I would have gotten
It
it.
was like 2 or 3 in the morning that night. It was like, here, check this out. It was like, wow, like different, like, because the thing is like there were the chords and the sort of folky strumming guitar part, but then your voice like turned it into something else entirely. Like it just painted a color. It added this element to it that just was like I like being in a band, like hearing a certain voice for a very long period of time. It's like that was a real different thing for me, number one. But then, like, there's this like bridge section of the song, that was this whole instrumental section. It was like, I mean, I don't know. It just
Right. Structure.
it
It was
sounded
different.
like the like something that could be played like at like an Olympic ceremony or something. Like it sounded like something the whole world could listen to. And I had never really um thought of it like that while it was being made, but when Tim like sort of architected the way that that all fit together and hearing it back like that, it was like, oh my goodness,
That's
like
something I want to know. Like, where did that middle eight, that breakdown melody come from?
that was the guitar part. It was that yeah, it's just I was playing the guitar and I was playing along with. So like I said before you had arrived, we had the beat, and I was playing to it, and playing different parts and like kind of throwing things together. We both like were kind of like, oh, that's good, that's really good, that
So, okay, you're a rock artist. Not to say that you don't have these kind of melodies and these inspirations
yeah, yeah.
in your being, but I think there's something to be said for Anne Marie being in the house.
uh, that's a whole other part of this story that fits in a totally, like we can have a whole other
Right. So
conversation about that.
your wife is Anne Marie, and she plays.
She's a violinist,
Mhm,
um, and depending on what day or hour, it's either like a violinist or a fiddle player. Like
mhm.
she's a hardcore, virtuosic bluegrass player, and also a completely like um, talent, classically trained, virtuosic
Yes.
classical violinist. in every sense of the word. She spent her entire childhood studying the violin, and it was sort of like when she was hanging out with her mom, you know, it was classical music, and her dad is a banjo player. And so Anne Marie actually won a Virginia State banjo championship when she was 12.
Amazing.
So this like Chinese girl playing a banjo with a bunch of, backwoods,
Yeah, banjo players and
hoodlums
oh,
playing bluegrass music, in the
so
woods.
my my perception then is that you may have had these kinds of melodies and musical sensibilities regardless, but her being around, do you think it had an influence on that particular melody that you decided to play at that particular time?
So yes, 100%. And there's a specific reason for it too, is we right around that time, I don't know if it was, I can't remember if it was like right before it or right after it. Anne Marie and I performed an event for the Grammys, and we had to play all this bluegrass music. And I was like sort of learning how to do this, and learning about bluegrass music. And when you and I, Tim, wrote Wake Me Up, it was right in the midst of me learning all this bluegrass music. So my head was like in that headspace. Like I
Mhm.
was completely immersed in learning all these songs, all these bluegrass songs. So when Tim came to me and said, "Hey, I want to like mix up all these different styles of music," I was like, "Great.
Yeah,
That sounds like what I'm doing right
I'm
now."
down.
So, so it all came together in such a poetic, thoughtful way. And that was what you really, I think, walked into the front door with, was like this thoughtful sensibility, this like dynamic that just like it could have been anything, right? Like it could have been a like a bluegrassy folk sort of song. But then like when you came in, it was just like, oh man, like I
I
could never
think
have even imagined that.
I'm glad that it all came together. It tied together in a really awesome way. For me, my style icon, I would say, lyrically and even vocally would be uh, Bill Withers, rest in peace.
Yeah, man.
And so he came from Slab Fork, Virginia. He was, in a coal mining town. He wrote folk songs, he wrote blues songs, he wrote pop songs in some
Yeah,
cases. But
he was deep.
it was always trying to achieve lyric that could stand on the shelf next to somebody like him. And I had these couplets that didn't really have a home, but when I was able to put them together in that room, I think it came together in a nice way, and we were able to accomplish that. This is just parts of the song production that I wasn't aware of, like where did the guitar part come from, that melody, when did the beat get made, and all that kind of stuff.
It was like before, so before we called you, Tim had come over and like, I think he was like 3 hours late again or something. And he was late and he was like, "Oh, I only have like 2 hours because I got to go meet up with Aloe." And it was like, but then we got into it and it was like, this is cool. And that was when I called you and was
Yeah,
like, "Hey man, I'm with Tim. I know we don't know each other, but
might as well.
man, man, come over here. Let's do this." And you could have said no, man. You could have just been like, I don't feel like driving like 90 minutes or
Yeah, it was
however long it
mad
took.
far, but you know what? It was late enough that there was nobody on the road, so I think I got there quickly. The thing for me was my wife was pregnant, so I scheduled my sessions around like when I should be home to be with her to help her out and that kind
Which
of
is
thing. So
like
I
all
was
the time.
basically, so I knew I was like, I got 4 good hours. I want to walk in there with at least some lyrics that I could piece together, and
Yeah,
I just
man.
chose the right ones.
You sure did. Those were
You ended
some.
up working with Tim though more, right? On another song at least.
Yeah, we wrote quite a few songs actually. And some of them like, became pieces of different songs that got
Right.
used in different places. Like I wrote a lot of those sort of like middle eight kind of like guitar melodies for
Oh
him
yeah.
that he kind of like. I would just go off and you know, he'd be like, here, just play. And I would just start playing. And then he would like take fragments of things that I played and say, you know, and write bridges around them and whatnot. Yeah, we wrote lots of music together, and you know, some of it saw the light of day, some of it didn't. Um, but you know, some stuff that's really great. You know, nothing as great as what we did though.
Well, I mean, I I think we are lucky. We hit a great moment because a lot of Tim's music, he was striving for something that was going to be timeless and effective and impact you know, a lot of hearts and souls. We hit we hit a good moment where there's just a major trifecta of like great song, the right time in the world, and the right people to put it together.
Yep.
Um, but you know, I wonder, um, had we not, uh, you know, made that moment happen where I was, yeah, if you're like, if I was like, nah, I'd rather just have a session with Tim so we can finish because we had started some stuff that was
Yeah.
really awesome, and I was like, I can't wait to finish this track. Going in to start a whole new one was for me kind of icing on the cake. I always wanted to get back to that one that we never got back to.
Which one was that?
There's this track called "Please Forgive Me." We started it, and for him, I think just like with everyone else, for him, the songs are always in progress,
Hmm.
right?
Always.
And and like a DJ, he's just moving to the next track, but that track still exists. I can pull that out of my bag anytime when I'm ready to use it, like he did with your middle eights, with your, you know,
Yep.
guitar lick.
Yep.
Um, but I'm thinking back to our stage performance at Ultra and our rehearsals. We rehearsed a few times in LA.
Yeah.
Um, but the rehearsals in LA were always like really short. Well, I think I rehearsed once or twice, but it's short because he was like always on the way to the private jet to get somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, but we had enough time to like practice and then get to Miami for the performance. What do you remember about that day?
Um, just that it was like absolutely overwhelming. It was so crazy, you know, the electronic.
You've done festivals before though, right? Of course, like
Yeah, lots.
huge festivals.
Lots of huge festivals, but you know, Ultra, especially then, I think it became more like there's some, you know, more like live artists, live, you know, with like artists with live music
Mm.
playing, you know, I think in the later years, but that was like, you
That was
know,
one of the first times, and especially with that setup, like it
I,
wasn't just one instrument. He got a whole
yeah,
band and like
but it was all, I think we talked about this, you know, like right before we went on stage, um, it was like, you know, there were like girls dancing on poles and stuff, and it was like a whole different, you know, thing. It was like a totally different environment, and then all of a sudden it's like Dan Tominski in a paisley shirt, you
right.
know, like it was just like could not have been like what we were doing was definitely like really different than what was happening the whole day, like as far as the the vibe and just, you know, Tim really, and I think it's something that he just continued to struggle with. You know, he really wanted to feel like he was a real musician, not just like some guy who like presses play. Like he struggled with that a lot. Like, you know, we talked about that a lot. You know,
Okay.
his you know, people around him, people at the record label, they really wanted him to go on, you know, they wanted us to go and play, you know, Wake Me Up on Saturday Night Live and like on all these, you know, and he felt like I'm not a real musician because like unless I could play like a piano solo or something like that. He really struggled with that. It was something that, and we even got together many times to like practice
That's
because because he would ask me, he'd be like, "Can you teach me how to like, can you tell me
Oh,
like
wow.
if this looks like, if this is like the real thing?" I'd always say to him, be like, "Tim, man, like all you need to do is just play the music that you created, that you wrote, that like that's your music, and you don't need to play a technically hard." He wanted to like learn these solo pieces, and he wanted to learn these piano pieces that were hard, because I think he felt like he needed some degree of like technical proficiency to be considered like a real musician. And I'd always be trying to tell him like, man, like you could sit down at a piano or whatever, you could just play one note, like, no, like,
Yeah,
it was definitely something that I know that he always had a hard time with.
that's interesting because yeah, I ended up seeing a lot of video of him, you know, practicing guitar, practicing piano, and I started to get the feeling like, oh, he's interested in learning these instruments and he wants to play. Um, but I know whenever we did our TV performances, like he wasn't around. He didn't want to be part of it.
And I don't know if you know this, but that was at least around me and around like what I knew and like the conversations we had, that was a really big piece of that. Like he felt really insecure about like that people would think he wasn't a real musician. That was
Got it.
something that really bothered him. And you know,
I think, in hindsight and in the way that we're able to continue to share his story and spread and continue his legacy, people are starting to recognize and realize because we get to tell these stories about how he created music, what his process was, and that um, he was truly involved from the beginning to the end of making these songs, and it wasn't like some other DJs who just hire the other producers to do it and then they put their name on it. He was part of the ideation and selection process, and maybe he didn't have the technical proficiency, but he definitely had the ear and he knew how to put it together.
I mean, and his ear had the technical proficiency. That's
Sure.
that's the that's what actually really matters. Like being able to play something really fast or whatever. It's like that's like, in many ways, that's like, getting really good at playing a video game or something. I mean, not to take anything away from any musicians who are like virtuosic at their instruments,
Hmm.
but at the same time, it's like to be able to conceive of the music, regardless of whether or not you can be the one, playing that hard fast part on the instrument, is like kind of beside the point. um and as far as his technical proficiency, he was like light years past a lot of people, um with what he could think of and how he looked at putting arrangements together.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really special person and artist, and definitely going to be missed for time and eternity. I want to thank you so much for joining me to pay tribute to Tim, and
Of
thank you
course.
for the contributions that you've made in music, from your personal life to your band life to the work that we've done together. Really appreciate you.
Of course, Aloe, and that goes both ways. And thank you for having me on here. And anytime, man. You call, I'll be there anytime.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. All right, man.